Good evening, everyone. Tonight, our panelists will consist of district leadership and school leadership here in Franklin Township Public Schools. First, we have Dr. John Ravally, who's our district superintendent, Mr. Orville Wilson, who is the director of school management and advocacy, Dr. Brenda Sofield, director of pupil personnel services. We have Ms. Evelyn Rutledge, who's the principal of Franklin Middle School, the Sampson G. Smith campus. We have Mrs. Karen Adams, who's the principal of McAfee Elementary Road School. We have Ms. Sharon McNeil, who's our behavior specialist and our PBSIS district coordinator. And translating with us tonight will be Mrs. Coquel, who is one of our wonderful teachers from Pine Grove Elementary School. I will now turn the assembly over to Dr. Ravally.
Thank you, Sharonda. First, let me take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Also, special thanks to Mrs. Martin, our vice principal from Franklin High School, and Ms. Peters, who's a guidance counselor at Franklin Middle School, Hamilton Street. They were the organizers of this event. We appreciate the additional time they put in to make this happen. I want to thank the panelists for giving of their time and for participating this evening as well. Before we get more into the details of our Road Back program, I want to stress whatever is stated today is as of this moment in time. The one thing we certainly have learned throughout the pandemic is that mitigation strategies are ever changing and are controlled by the behavior of the virus at any given point in time. So with that said, I want to thank our wonderful medical team, including our school doctor, Dr. Mike Kelly, our pupil personnel services director, Dr. Sofield, who was introduced a little bit earlier, our district lead nurse, Terry Giorgiani. She's also our EAS school nurse, our assistant lead nurse, Kim McNee, and their team of school nurses who have done an amazing job providing guidance to our staff during these difficult times over the last several months. I want to also thank our families and staff and the rest of the Franklin school community for their continued support as we navigate these uncharted waters. Finally, thanks to our Safe Return Committee, who last year was our term something else, and prior to that term something else, but they've stuck together through this whole process, and they're now titled the Safe Return Committee. And they have been working hard all summer long, going through guidance, turning to resources, doing research, and have helped to create our plans for safe return, much of what you'll hear about tonight. You can find the district plan in the form of a presentation, in the form of a PowerPoint presentation on the district website for those interested. And my understanding is, and Sharonda, perhaps you can clarify, or Ms. Martin, perhaps you can clarify, Ms. Peters, we are also taping this particular event and we'll provide a link on our website for this particular event as well, which will have a lot of information in it as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, so we are recording this.
Yes,
so
sir.
If you miss something as we go through, you can always go back and review it later. Certainly, if you don't get a chance to ask your question, we're always available for questions and we'll provide answers. And there's frequently asked questions section on our website as well. For people who have been submitting questions, there's answers to those also. Before we begin and get into some of the nuts and bolts of our plan for this year, I did want to provide some statistics. I'm going to provide some updated statistics with regard to staff vaccinations, and I'm going to speak quickly to Governor Murphy's announcement earlier today regarding staff vaccinations. According to our most recent survey, which is still open for staff responses, and I stress that it hasn't been open all that long. We created it last week and it's been open through the weekend. And remember, many of our staff are just now reconnecting with their emails and whatnot, because they were on a well-deserved break. So we have 874 staff members who have now responded, which is about 70% of our total staff. And according to that survey, we have about 90% of those who responded who are already vaccinated, for a total of 794 staff. Now, to give that some context, we have a little over 1,200 staff members. So we have better than half responding at this point. And of that, we have 794 staff members who said they're vaccinated. And of course, we anticipate as the survey responses continue to come in that we will see the total number of vaccinated staff increasing. For those who have yet to report that they are vaccinated, as staff return for professional development in coming weeks, we'll work with them to be sure they report their status. And we pledge to work with these staff members to be sure that every staff member has an opportunity to meet the vaccination requirement announced earlier today by the governor. And or they'll meet the required testing protocols, which will be detailed by the governor sometime tomorrow in email, in memos to superintendents. So we look forward to getting the guidance there. But again, so far, we are seeing a high number of staff members who are vaccinated. We anticipate that'll continue. And we are having an opportunity for staff members, which will be announced tomorrow, to get vaccinated. And that will be as soon as Monday. So what we did was we broke this presentation into sections, and we've got 6 of them. The last one is questions from the chat. The first 5 really are going to hit key areas that we think there's a large interest in, areas that we crafted, or actually Ms. Peters and Ms. Martin crafted around the questions that were submitted. So the first section I'm going to handle, and it's titled Attendance and Instruction. And the first bullet that I'm going to be talking to is attendance. We got a lot of questions around the topic of attendance. And as you heard, if you heard the governor speak today, there will be no virtual option for students. Right now, the anticipation is school districts will and are required to offer a full 5-day program that will be open, or as of today, schools are open full day, 5 days per week, according to the BOE approved calendar, of course, for 2021, 2022. There's no virtual option available for the 21-22 school year as there was in the previous year. And that's all as per the latest NJ DOE guidance and the latest laws governing the use of remote instruction. The only time remote instruction can be counted as a school day is when and if the governor declares a health emergency and shuts schools down via an executive order, like occurred last year, and how we ended the year in June. However, in June 2021, that executive order expired. Our local health department can force a school shutdown for one reason or another and can approve remote instruction at that time. It is anticipated that local health departments will provide that flexibility, or at least we've been told, when whole classes, multiple classes, whole schools, or whole districts need to be shut for COVID-19 related reasons. For individual students who are required to quarantine, home instruction is to be offered to help provide continuity for learning. Home instruction is governed, for those of you that are interested, home instruction is governed by NJAC 6A 16-10.1 and 10.2, and allows for the delivery of instruction at home for individual students in a variety of formats, including virtual instruction. However, the instruction does not typically take place synchronously with the class, but usually at a time other than class time. Pre-COVID, sometimes that would happen right in the home, could happen in a library, could happen in some other common public places beyond the home, or could happen virtually. That is allowable. So it can be synchronous, virtual, but it would be a time other than class time. The instruction is usually delivered by the child's teacher or another appropriately certified teacher in coordination with the child's teacher. So that's really, and as far as attendance goes, with relationship to those who might be quarantined, once home instruction kicks in, that child is counted as present. Kindergarten and pre-K, that was another topic we were asked about. So it's a topic we'd like to address. The kindergarten and pre-K program will be typical and offered for the same amount of time, utilizing the same curriculum as our pre-COVID-19 program. There is one difference. We've actually expanded our pre-K program. We now have 50 pre-K general, pre-K 3-year-old, pre-K 3 general education students who have been sectioned into about 15 students per section, and they've been assigned to a school nearest their attendance zone or to the early childhood program at Franklin High School. So that's a newer addition to our pre-K program. We look to continue to expand that in future years so that we may host more 3-year-olds in our pre-K program. But for next year, this coming year, I shouldn't say next year, for this coming year that starts in September, we've registered 50. And that's about what we can accommodate in our buildings in a safe way. So that's where we're going to start for this particular year. But kindergarten and pre-K programs will run the traditional length that they've always run. There's no shortening of the day for them, so forth and so on. Grading policies, that was another topic. And I'm moving along pretty quickly because we have several sections and lots of information to give you. Again, this will be recorded, so you could always go back and revisit it. Grading policy. Our grading policy returns to traditional, with student workloads and exceptions being more closely, or expectations rather, not exceptions, student workloads and expectations being more closely aligned to pre-COVID-19. Again, we're full day, full in person, with the support of home instruction for those who can't attend for quarantine purposes or sick reasons. So with that said, that's pretty typical of how we always operate. So our grading policies, the expectation is we'll return to what is our typical expectation. If a student misses instructional time due to being quarantined or sick, as I just said, home instruction will kick in, and those days missed will count as present for the student. So there'll be no seat time issues at the high school level. With that said, there will be a large emphasis placed on supporting the emotional needs of our students. Faculty and staff, I can tell you, have been working this summer to undergo additional social emotional training to help support students. Administrative leadership has gone through resiliency training to help support both staff and students, because they'll be sharing some of what they learned with their staff to keep everybody healthy. And we have plenty of supports in place, such as mentoring programs, formal SEL programs. And once again, we've engaged agencies like Rutgers Behavioral Health, Effective School Solutions, and others that will help provide social and emotional learning supports for both our students and staff. Instruction. So there was a lot of comments around instruction, and of course, instruction, we will attempt to return to what is more of our traditional pedagogy as students are now coming back full-time and in person. However, we know there will be challenges on group work, so we'll be placing less emphasis on group work because we want to maintain social distance, and we'll be placing more emphasis on individual work in order to help maintain social distancing. At the elementary level, students receive a full program with students moving about more than students. With teachers moving about more than students. So the idea there is, I'll give you an example. In third grade, we do have teaching teams, and oftentimes kids would get up and move, which is healthy under normal circumstances. But because we're trying to cohort as much as we can, we'll move teachers instead of students. However, different than last year, where some of our special areas, we brought the teachers to the students, we are going to allow the students, because it is a full day and we do need time to give students a break out of the room. We will bring students to some of their special area subjects, especially those that are more dependent on the room environment, such as an art, music, so forth and so on. In music classes, we will follow the Arts Ed of New Jersey guidelines, and we will be able to perform, and we will be able to practice and do those types of things. There are devices that you can put on instruments that we've purchased that will, contain aerosols. Students will sing with masks. If you're at all interested, the Arts Ed New Jersey organization has done a wonderful job providing resources to school districts that will allow arts to continue in a very safe way. So that's a little bit on instruction. With regard to orientations, there were a lot of questions about orientations. We hosted one of these programs. A little while ago. Oh, I did fail to mention phys ed. We do have lots of activities that are less strenuous and more creative in the phys ed realm. We are going to try and get outside as much as possible. Our phys ed supervisor has done a wonderful job working this summer with his phys ed staff to create safe activities that will allow students to participate, yet in a very safe manner. And of course, there were quite a few resources that we were able to draw upon to give us some suggestions about how we could do that safely. Orientations, our last program, and I felt it necessary to at least speak to this because in our last program, which we hosted earlier in July, we had a wonderful suggestion from a parent who joined us in the forum through a question. And that was, could we provide more opportunities for orientations this year? Because in his case, he had a child entering first grade and their child had never been in the building because obviously last year they had chose remote and they chose not to be in the building. So his child will be entering that particular school for the first time. So with that said, we traditionally offer an orientation at the pre-K level, the kindergarten level, the 6th grade level, and the 9th grade level. This year, we're hosting orientations for families with students in grades pre-K, K, 1, 6, 7, 9, and 10. So I know orientations for 9 and 10 are scheduled this week, and they'll be separate. I think, grade 9 might be at one point in the week, grade 10 at another point in the week. And I'm sure the same is true of all the other orientations. And if you haven't gotten an orientation date, you have a child in one of those grade levels, your building principal should be notifying you sooner rather than later, and we will remind them to do so. But I know that they have certainly scheduled orientations for all of those grade levels because that was how we planned it. So that speaks to attendance, kindergarten and pre-K day, which a lot of questions about that again, grading policies, which really have not changed much, instruction, which again will look a little different in that it won't place so much emphasis on group work, but for the most part, most everything else we will do with, again, using the guidance of the professional organizations in those areas. And of course, orientations, which I know are on a lot of people's minds right now because we're heading back to the beginning of school, which starts for students on September 9th. So with that said, again, you're going to hear a lot more about other things related to these areas as well in several of the other sections, but we do want to leave plenty of time for questions, and we do only have a limited amount of time. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Orville Wilson, who is our Director of School Management, and Ms. Sharon McNeil, who is a district behaviorist. Both of them are going to speak to order and operations, including bus, cafeteria, drills, visitors in buildings, locker usage, water fountain usage, and the role of PBSIS in supporting order and operations. So Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Dr. Ravally. So my first item has to do with transportation. It's bus transportation services and expectations for students. First off, buses are being organized with the goal of capping the number of students assigned to a bus. We plan to do that by assigning 1 student to each of the small seats and 2 students to the larger seats. Like last year, Buses will be sanitized between the morning runs and the afternoon runs, and again each evening. Common touch areas will be sanitized using district-issued sanitized wipes between the runs between the schools. Currently, we do have some buses that are oversubscribed. So we are encouraging those who can transport their children to and from school to notify their building principal to assist in reducing the number of students on buses, especially at the high school level. We currently have sent some surveys out to those buildings that have buses that are overprescribed with the intent of identifying parents who can do just that. We are doing our very best to meet our cap of less than 40 students per bus. With regard to the cafeteria and our lunches, breakfast and lunches will be served. Breakfast items will be individually wrapped with a selection of items similar to that of a traditional school year. And students will eat breakfast in the cafeteria on a schedule that has been developed by their building principal, rather than eating in the classrooms. Lunch menus will be closely aligned to the traditional ones prior to COVID. With these exceptions, there won't be any self-serve or buffet stations, and the sharing of food is not allowed. Students in K through 8 will be assigned a seat for lunch, while high school students will select a table. Once the high school students have selected their table, they will register themselves to that table using the Q&R codes. In grades K through 12, students will be expected to sit socially distanced and socially distanced at the tables, and that they will, and we will mark the tables so that they are, to assist them in figuring out that space. Each of the schools have identified additional spaces inside the building to supplement their cafeteria. And each of the schools have also established outside eating areas to support both the lunch and the breakfast program. With regard to drills, as of today, according to the New Jersey Department of Education, all emergency drills are to be conducted in a normal manner, which means students will have to evacuate the building during a fire drill, and they'll have to react as normal for all other types of drills, such as lockdowns or shelter in place, etc. We will ask and remind faculty to be mindful of keeping students masked and socially distanced during all of our drills. Locker usage is next. As of today, we are planning to allow the optional use of lockers for secondary students in grades 6 through 12. We intend on spreading students out, utilizing the entire lot of lockers in each building. Sharing lockers will be prohibited, and lockers will be periodically disinfected throughout the day, utilizing a spray disinfectant and disinfected again each evening. Water fountain usage. The use of water fountains will be prohibited as it was last year. However, students will be able to utilize the bottle filler stations that have been installed in each of our school buildings. And last, I want to talk a little bit, share with you a little bit about the role of PBS in supporting how we teach our students to follow and adhere to these orders and operations. And to assist me doing that, I'm going to call on Ms. Sharon McNeil. Ms. McNeil?
Okay, so I'm unmuted. PBSIS is in all of the schools, and we will use that framework to establish supportive, positive behavior with regard to mask wearing, social distancing, and being safe and being clean in our buildings. So all behavior is going to be respectful and safe, and those behaviors will be taught, demonstrated, expected, and recognized, while negative or inappropriate behavior will be addressed and corrected. And we have systems in place for all of that at each of our schools in the district.
Thank you. And our next area is health. To do that, we'll be calling on Dr. Brenda Sophia.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We had many questions, as you can imagine, regarding health and how we are planning to bring the students back as safely as possible, following all the guidelines that have been issued by both the CDC and the State Department of Health. There were many questions about vaccinations and testing sites. There will be ongoing opportunities for vaccination throughout the school year. The next one was going to be on Monday, August 30th, where secondary students aged 12 and older will be eligible to get vaccinated at Franklin High School between the hours of 7 a.m. and 12 p.m. The Somerset County Department of Health is setting up a pop-up vaccine clinic in the event's lobby that day. The Pfizer vaccine will be given to those students registered to receive the vaccine on Monday, the 30th. There's a link for registration for the vaccine on the district website. There are additional local vaccination sites if you can't make it to that particular opportunity. Those include the Somerset Park Pharmacy on Easton Avenue, the CVS on Elizabeth Avenue, the Walgreens on Route 27, and the Stop and Shop on Route 27. They all have mechanisms for online registration to sign up to get your vaccine at your convenience. We're also partnering with the township once again to host weekly testing at the Hamilton Street campus. It starts this Sunday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Anyone interested in testing through the township program can register online on the township's website. We've had many questions regarding when students should stay home, what mask requirements look like, and when students will get masking breaks. If your child or someone close in the household or family member is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, please have them stay home. I can't emphasize this enough. Having us all work together makes all the jobs easier. The main job is for us and for you. If you're not feeling well, stay home and call your doctor. Your doctor's office will give you guidance on how to proceed. We're also asking that you contact your child's school nurse to make them aware that your child is experiencing symptoms of COVID, and they will also guide you in how to proceed. Symptoms of COVID-19 include fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, fatigue, muscle body aches, headache, a loss of taste or smell, a sore throat, congestion, runny nose, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. All students and staff in the buildings will be required to wear face masks at all times. In addition to being appropriately socially distanced, students will be afforded opportunities for mask breaks during the school day, including lunch and outdoor breaks. Mask breaks will be authorized by faculty when they're deemed necessary. Additional notification procedures regarding COVID and school closings and exposure in the classroom. When district personnel become aware of a potential COVID-19 exposure, the lead nurses will contact the County Department of Health for guidance, and they begin to follow a series of protocols, including contact tracing, that allow us to identify who might potentially be exposed and what the response should be. When an exposure potentially occurs, parents and staff members are notified if there is a need for quarantine. Fully vaccinated staff and students are not required to quarantine if they're exposed based on the current health department guidance. Again, as Dr. Ravally stressed earlier, that's what today's guidance is. That might change in the future. If it does, we will keep you informed. As of today, the guidance is if you're fully vaccinated, you are not required to quarantine. Students will be encouraged to get a COVID test 3 to 5 days after exposure if they are fully vaccinated. Unvaccinated students and staff will be required to quarantine for 14 days after a known exposure. There are no current exceptions to the quarantine mandate. Other questions we got regarding daily temperature checks and COVID screening forms that we had in place during the last school year. Based upon the current health department guidance, the district will no longer be requiring the daily screening forms to be completed prior to your child attending school or the daily temperature checks to enter the building. However, students and families are once again asked to monitor the health and safety and comply with measures to ensure that anyone who's suspected of having COVID-19 stays home and gets tested. We will be sending weekly reminders via the principal's offices, requesting that parents be diligent about the list of symptoms and the monitoring of their students on a daily basis. Questions regarding rapid testing and isolation room use. Students who come to school and present with COVID-like symptoms will be referred to the school nurse for evaluation. Students will wait in a designated isolation space under the guidance of a nurse until a parent arrives. These isolation spaces have filtration devices and safety measures in place. Students who are suspected of having COVID-19 will be offered a rapid PCR test at one of 3 district locations free of charge. Parents must accompany their child to the directed school site where the children will be tested at the parent's request. We anticipate results will be available within 24 hours of the rapid test. Quarantine procedures. If a student or a staff member is required to quarantine, they must self-isolate for a period of 14 days. You cannot test out of quarantine. Students who have been quarantined will be receiving home instruction during the period of quarantine. Home instruction is 5 hours of asynchronous instruction per week, 10 hours for special needs students. Asynchronous instruction, I'm referring to instruction that's not necessarily going to happen during the typical school day. This instruction will most likely be occurring after the normal hours of the school day. As far as travel, domestic travel, according to the CDC, unvaccinated individuals who travel should get tested 1 to 3 days before their trip and 3 to 5 days after their trip. And they should stay home and self-quarantine for 7 days after domestic travel. Domestic travel is considered any travel outside of the states that are connected directly to New Jersey. Students who travel will be required to participate in home instruction during the 7-day self-quarantine period. Vaccinated staff members and students are not required to quarantine. As far as international travel, all travelers, in order to get on a plane to come back to the United States, must present a negative COVID test to re-enter the United States. We had questions regarding safety, sanitizing, and air filtration. The students are encouraged to bring refillable water bottles for their use while at school. As stated earlier, there will be water bottle fillers available in all the buildings, and we're not allowing the students to use the water fountains. If a student arrives at school and doesn't have an appropriate face mask, one will be provided for them. Wipes and sanitizing stations are located throughout all school buildings. Additional cleaning measures have been implemented throughout each building, and the cleaning protocols can be found posted online. Each school building has been inspected and air quality tested. Significant upgrades to school filtration systems have been implemented, and additional upgraded filtration measures are ongoing. As far as vaccine resources and partnerships, all public school staff as of today are required to be vaccinated by October 18th, 2021. Staff who are not vaccinated at this time will be required to submit to weekly testing to work in our buildings. Somerset County has a variety of opportunities where anyone over the age of 12 can receive a COVID vaccine. Again, we will be hosting a vaccine clinic at Franklin High School in the events lobby on Monday, the 30th, from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. Any student can use the link on the district website to sign up. Please remember that students under the age of 18 must be accompanied by a parent to participate in the clinic. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hand off the presentation to Mrs. Rutledge and Mrs. Adams, and they will speak regarding extracurricular and support activities.
Thank you, Dr. Sofield. I'm Evelyn Rutledge, and thank you for coming this evening. My question will be pertaining to athletics. The athletic programs will occur as typical, provided that enrollment is sufficient. Athletes are highly recommended to become vaccinated. Those athletes who are vaccinated do not need to be quarantined in the cases of exposure to someone who is COVID-19 symptomatic. Those athletes that are not vaccinated do need to quarantine in the event they are exposed to someone who tests positive for COVID-19. We will have and maintain secondary extracurricular activities, and Mrs. Adams, my colleague, will also address that. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Ms. Rutledge. Good evening, everyone. As mentioned early, our extracurricular activities will operate this year like the athletic department, providing there is sufficient enrollment. All of our participants are encouraged to be vaccinated. Should a student who is vaccinated be exposed to someone who is COVID-19 symptomatic, they will not need to quarantine. If those students who are not vaccinated are exposed to someone who has tested positive, they will be required to quarantine. Also, with regard to competitive clubs, if there are off-campus events that are hosted by our partner organizations, students will be able to attend. However, you should know most of these off-campus organizations, when they're sponsoring the competitions, they are asking that students provide proof of vaccination. So we do continue to encourage you to have your youngster vaccinated if they are eligible. Okay, Ms. Rutledge, you ready?
I am ready to address the field trip question. Field trips will be very limited during the first portion of the school year, and only those that need to travel off campus as part of a competitive club will be approved. All other trips will be postponed for the first semester, and a decision will be made for trips during the second semester in December. So we will just see how things go. and we will be able to make more informed decisions regarding field trips for the second semester. The next, go ahead, Ms. Adams, you wanted to address anything with elementary in this section, or are we? good?
Oh, no, it pertains to what you just said.
Okay, great. And then also physical education, I will address this portion and Mrs. Adams will address the playground. For our physical education classes, our activities will occur, but they will be limited to non-strenuous type activities that allow mask wearing, similar to the activities of last year. Outdoor activities will happen as frequently as possible, and the physical education teachers at our schools will be communicating the expectations to our students for physical education when they return. We will not be changing for physical education during the first part of the school year. Thank you. Mrs. Adams?
Thank you. As it relates to playground, we will use the playground as often, weather permitting, as often as possible. We will, to the greatest extent possible, keep students in cohorts or within their learning pod. And at the end of each recess period or physical education period, if they're out there using any type of equipment, it will be sanitized before the next group will use any of that equipment. As relates to before and after care, the YMCA of Hillsborough will manage our before and after care. This will happen at the elementary campuses and the middle school if enrollment is sufficient. Any family that's interested in registering for before and after care should visit our district website, and all the registration information is available, and you'll be contacted by a representative from the Hillsborough YMCA. So with that, Ms. Martin, I think I'm turning this back over to you. Oh, Ms. Martin looks frozen.
Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Yeah.
I was answering questions in the Q&A chat. So Dr. Ravally, Dr. Sofield, Mr. Wilson, I've collected a couple of questions that I could not answer in the chat that I will present to you to answer. So the first one is for Dr. Ravally. Dr. Ravally, there's a participant who would like to know, will you be visiting, you along with other district leaders, will you be visiting schools to ensure that the protocols and procedures that you just mandated are in place and are taken effect throughout the school year?
Absolutely. And not only that, I mean, we're in schools regularly, but we'll be conducting our normal observations of teachers, and I'll be conducting normal observations of principals and administrators. And we will certainly be obviously looking in on our schools to be sure, less about compliance, because I will tell you our administrators are very serious about making sure we're in compliance and following the plan, but more about how can we better support their efforts and what do we need to do to make adjustments if necessary at particular buildings. I'm not worried that our folks won't carry out the plan. I'm just worried, I'm not worried, but I want to be able to support, and we want to be able to support what it is they're doing in the schools to meet the requirements of the plan. So yes, the short answer is we'll be out and around like we always are and like we were last year. And I've been trying to keep up with some of those questions as well, by the way. You're muted, Sharon.
The next question is for Dr. Sofield. Dr. Sofield, what will related services look like? Will there be push in and push out at the middle school level, especially for students with autism?
Well, that's a good question. As of right now, it appears that we are going to be able to provide therapeutic services in a more traditional manner, both push in and pull out, depending on the needs of the child. We are anticipating doing more push-in services, especially in the autism classes, because those small class sizes and relative learning needs makes that a natural fit. So we will be doing more push-in services, particularly in the autism classrooms.
Thank you, Dr. Sofield. Next question, Mr. Wilson or Dr. Ravally can speak to this question, is regarding bus passes. Parents would like to know how will they receive bus passes and when will they receive communication regarding timing and stops for buses?
Bus passes are going to go out through the Genesis system like they did last year when we were in the hybrid format. So we'll be using Genesis to communicate bus passes. So there'll be a message to parents to let them know that bus passes are available via Genesis when that time comes. And I didn't catch the second part of your question, but maybe Mr. Wilson can answer.
Could you repeat that too? Because I was thinking about that, your answer, Dr. Ravally. Can you repeat that, Sharonda?
The question is, how will students receive bus passes and when will parents and families receive communication regarding timing and stops?
Okay, so regarding the timing, and so when information will go out, typically it goes out that last week in August. And just prior to the start of school, I expect that it will continue to get that information out at that time.
And just to be clear, so we're not sending physical passes out, right? Because we're trying to limit the touch and sharing of papers and those types of things. And last year we were successful in using Genesis to populate bus passes. And my understanding is transportation has been working with the principals to do the same for this year. And I see principals shaking their head yes. So that's what's happening. So I just want to be clear, it won't be till closer. You'll get your stop in time closer to the end of the summer, about a week, 10 days before the start of the year. But you're going to get it through Genesis. So we'll be blasting a message to tell you, go ahead and access it. And then, of course, if anybody needs a paper copy or has issues retrieving from Genesis, they can call the transportation office and they'll assist and get them whatever they need.
Thank you, Dr. Ravally and Mr. Wilson. This question may be more for Mrs. Adams, but this question is, will pre-K students have nap time? And if so, will they wear their mask during that time?
Well, they do have nap time. I'm not sure about the mask during sleeping. It doesn't seem like they would, but I have to
Ravally's
to
shaking
Dr.
his head.
Ravally.
I'm going to let Dr. Sofield answer this because she also oversees our pre-K programs. She oversees Mrs. Demore, but there are very specific guidelines with regard to nap time and how we should go about it in the COVID world. So go ahead, Dr. Sofield.
At this point, I would rather not comment on the mask because I'm not 100% sure, and our supervisor is actually out today. It's actually a question I had for her as well, because I'm not sure what the protocol is going to be, and things are still changing, and we're still getting guidance. So I'm going to have to say we're going to have to wait and hear back from the teachers regarding. You'll hear from your teacher regarding that. Hopefully, we'll be able to push out information to preschool parents. Additional information about preschool lunches and nap time prior to the school starting.
However, guidance we did get, and I read everything that comes across my desk. So I will share with you that, the suggestion is head to foot, right? Not putting kids. So you got one mat this way, you've got the other mat another way, socially distanced students. So you don't have one student breathing on another student. That's the guidance that we've gotten so far. So there is a prescription for taking naps, and yes, there will be pre-K naps.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sofield and Ms. Adams and Dr. Ravally. Another question that's in the chat that wasn't spoken to. Question from the parent is, can students bring their own lunch and breakfast to school?
Yeah, I actually answered that for the parent. Obviously, folks can bring lunch. We always could and can. Breakfast, maybe Mrs. Adams or maybe Miss Adams can help me with that. They do bring breakfast as well.
Most of the pre-COVID students who were eating breakfast at home were eating breakfast at home. They weren't bringing breakfast to school to eat pre-pandemic. So I would think that would be the same practice of those parents who
It will, but I'll share this with everybody. current pandemic rules allow us to serve breakfast to whomever wants a breakfast. So if you're a parent and you want your child to eat breakfast, you don't have to even send a student with breakfast. We'll be offering the individually wrapped cereals, individually
Yeah,
wrapped
I'm open.
snack bars, those types of things to every
I'm
child.
gonna answer when I'm going to.
We can hear you, Sharonda. It is at no cost to the parent. So breakfast is at no cost to the parent. Lunch is typical lunch, though. If if you qualify for reduced lunch, you'll get reduced lunch. If you qualify for free lunch, you'll get free lunch. If you don't and you're buying lunch, then you have to buy lunch. Or you can bring lunch. But breakfast, everyone is entitled to, or not entitled to, but everyone is being offered and can take a breakfast, and that is part of the federal regulations for this year during COVID times. So you don't really need to send a breakfast in because there'll be plenty of options for students that'll be individually wrapped and safe. And again, principals are working with their cafeteria managers and Mrs. de Blasio, who's our food service director, to create schedules to bring kids to the rooms that we have that are dedicated to eating, so everyone may participate. And yes, we will lose some instructional time for that. We apologize for that, but it is the safe way to consume food, to come in, remove masks, and start eating right away in classrooms. Probably not something that we're interested in doing right now.
Thank you, Dr. Ravally.
Welcome.
Another question is,
I like
will parents have to show proof of their child's vaccination?
So we're going to ask parents to show proof to the nurse. So if you have a secondary student who's vaccinated, we're going to ask that you provide that vaccination information to your school nurse. Remember, your child's medical records are kept separate from all other records, so no eyes are on the medical records except for those who are part of the medical team. It's helpful for us. It's helpful for the nurses. It'll be helpful for quarantining purposes. And the same is going to be true of staff. We will be asking staff to provide proof of vaccination to their school nurses when they return. Obviously, right now, we're just surveying so we can get a handle on how many folks are vaccinated, but we will be asking for proof upon their return, especially now given the governor's current announcement or latest announcement requiring staff be fully vaccinated. And the same will be true for staff. They have a separate medical record kept by the nurses, and the nurses will do that as well. And again, that's for quarantining purposes and so forth and so on. So the short answer is yes. We would like for parents to share that information with their school nurses.
Thank you. We have about 4 or 5 minutes remaining, so I have a couple more questions. One concern that's come up a couple of times is, why are we not doing COVID forms and daily temperature checks?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm going to let Dr. Sofield respond, but I'm going to take a stab at it first. I'm going to let her test. I'm going to test my own knowledge. So we had this conversation with our medical team prior to the beginning of the summer or during the summer in July. And the concern was, with so many students coming back, that temperature taking, and I'll start with that it would be more difficult to maintain that social distance upon entry than what the temperature taking bared to do for us last year. So our nurses, our medical team felt that it was more wise for us to encourage screening at home. And then, of course, we had the COVID forms. And again, I know it's challenging for everyone to at times do that. So we've come up with another suggestion, and this was suggested by the county, by the way, because of the logistics surrounding checking those forms and making sure thousands of kids fill them out each day. Rather than doing that, we're going to constantly remind parents via a weekly message that they need to be scanning for the following symptoms. And every time you visit our website, a pop-up is going to come up that encourages you to do that as well. And the rationale behind that is we want our nurses to focus on what's important, and that's the safe and healthy of our staff and students. and we don't want them spending all day looking through thousands of forms. It was a little bit more manageable when we had, 40% of the kids coming in. It would be very difficult when we have 100% of the kids coming in. So in truth, that's what many districts are doing and most districts are doing. And the health department has shared strategies that I just announced that may be a good substitute for that. So we're going to invoke those. How did I do, Dr. Sofield?
I would say that was A+. Very nice.
Thank you. But we did have lots of discussion around that, just so you know. What else?
Will students be sharing manipulatives and will students be sharing manipulatives and supplies in the classroom?
So I'll take that one too. Because, we spent a lot of time during the budget season working with budget managers, curriculum supervisors and directors, requesting that they order additional manipulatives. Now, we're hoping that individual students will have individual sets, but we know that's not always possible. So when that's not possible, manipulatives will be wiped down after each use before they're used by somebody else. There was a question earlier on, and I just want to address this because it kind of relates. Somebody asked about Lysol wipes. I'm going to ask that parents on this call share this information with their neighbors. And if this is on supply list, please avoid sending in wipes. We have wipes. We have Board of Health approved wipes that they're called buckets of wipes, and they come, there's hundreds in a bucket, and we have many buckets. And when we need more, we'll get more. We're prepared to distribute those as we did last year. Those are the wipes that we would prefer to use because they're health department approved. They meet all the COVID requirements. We know that they'll do their diligence on I don't want to say removing COVID, but wiping it away, if you will. And we have certain sprays that we can use as well. So we would prefer that you don't send anything in and allow us to utilize the materials that we have because we have plenty of them. And if you're interested in our cleaning protocols at all, we have a whole document on the website just on cleaning, and you can read it at your leisure and hear about all the different things that we're doing to make sure we clean common areas, so forth and so on. So the answer to the manipulatives is we ordered a lot of additional materials this year using some of the federal response money that we got. And on top of that, in instances where we absolutely must share, we're going to do that sparingly and we'll be wiping in between. What else you have?
It's 8 o'clock, so we're going to ask two last questions. One is, will PPE clear protective barriers be used in classroom or student desk?
So the answer to that is we have several thousand, but we have spaced students out by 3-foot increments. But we know that there'll be instances where students have to get more closely together. I'll give you an example. Academic support might be a good example. Speech, other areas. So principals will be identifying with teachers when those times are necessary. And we have barriers that can be utilized for those instances, but we don't intend at this point in putting them on every desk. It would be another area that needs to be wiped down because remember, if you take your mask off and depend on the barrier, now we've got to clean the barrier. The mandate of masks has eliminated really the need for that, and the social distancing, as long as we're following those rules, the mask and the social distancing, we're being told, is enough. But we do have instances where we know kids might have to get a little closer together, and we've got several thousand barriers that we actually have and are being distributed to schools now to be utilized by principals and teachers as they see fit.
Okay, this is the last question. It's a pretty big question. So the question is, the governor's executive order and the district's policy mirrors, and that is, when there is a exception for a student to not wear a mask, will that be honored and how?
So There are only certain exceptions, and those exceptions need to be submitted to the building principal and then reviewed. In many cases, most of those are medical, reviewed by either the child study team if it's a special needs related situation, or the medical team, which is our school doctor and the folks that are in that medical world. Will review those requests. But understand, and I want to be clear about this, we are encouraging, if a child can wear a mask, we're encouraging that they wear the mask. We're, politics aside, we just want kids safe, and we want kids wearing masks, containing aerosols, and being safe and being able to learn. If we're going to be in school, we want to be in school and be as safe as possible. And we're being told that mask wearing is important. And so we're going to encourage it. So if you have an exception, and there's some bona fide exceptions, then as we did last year, submit your exceptions and they'll be reviewed. And if they need to be, if they're bona fide and it's necessary, then our doctor and whomever else is involved in that will sign off on it. And we'll make sure that that child doesn't wear a mask. But for the most part, we're hoping that we have a high percentage of students wearing masks, because we know that that will help keep everyone safe.
Thank you, Dr. Ravally. Participants and panelists is now 8:04. Mr. Wilson, you can proceed with the end of the presentation.
Okay. Our goal continues to be that of ensuring a safe return to full-time in-person learning for our students and staff. With that in mind, we will continue to follow the guidance from the CDC and our local health department. We will also make available academic, social, emotional, and mental health supports for students and staff as needed. However, we all play an important role in this process of returning our students to full-time in-person learning, and that includes adhering to the masking and the social distancing requirements, vaccinations for everyone who is eligible to receive one, taking advantage of the available COVID testing resources, and ongoing dialogue around COVID in our community and the impact of our efforts to keep students and staff safe. I would like to thank the members of our panel, Dr. Ravally, the Superintendent, Dr. Brenda Sofield, Director of Pupil Personnel Services, Evelyn Rutledge, Principal at SGS, and Karen Adams, Principal at McAfee Road School, Sharon McNeil, our District Behavioral Specialist and PBS Coordinator, Ms. Coquel, the translator for this evening, and a special thanks to the production team that organized and coordinated all of the activities this evening. Sharonda Martin, Vice Principal at Franklin High School, Keon Peters, Guidance Counselor at the Hamilton campus, and Karen Adams, who I've already introduced, and Sharon McNeil. And finally, on behalf of the district administration, the staff, and the Board of Education, I want to thank all of the participants, all of the families who registered for this event this evening. Your input, your questions, very insightful, and we want to let you know that we're listening to you. We're looking forward to a safe and productive 2021-2022 school year. So having said that, I wish to bid you all good night.
Thanks all.
Whoa, whoa.